a little ritual that I engage in on a Saturday morning. I go and join the runners at the Black Walnut. They're there before me, but I didn't run there. But I was looking at one of the women sitting having her breakfast. She had a shirt on. I hadn't got my pen to note it in total, but the summary of it was no challenge, no change. Well, I'm sure that we've all faced and perhaps are facing challenges. And those challenges are a real opportunity for us to change. Because if it's business as usual, it's business as usual. There's no change. The first reading spoke from Jeremiah, faithful servant of the Lord, telling people that Jerusalem is going to fall. They were going to be exiled to Babylon, and he said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. That'll never happen." And they give him a really hard time. And he remonstrates with God, because when you do love somebody, you can fight with them as well, as I'm sure many of you know, and still love them. And at the end of it, that short extract that we heard, it spoke about he felt something in his heart, that he know, even though he is angry with God, that it is the one true God that he's worshipping and desiring to follow. Last week we heard Peter elevated to this amazing position among the 12. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Well, it's not so long after that, in fact, very, very soon, when Jesus gives a teaching about suffering, that he dares to take him aside. And, "We can't have any of that, Mr. Livesey." Because he didn't understand. And so often it's difficult for us to understand the meaning of suffering and death in our lives. It's something we preachers talk about, but it's something that causes most of us at some time in our life great pain and great difficulty. But suffering does give opportunities for change. And really, that's why we come here to worship God. Because every time we begin Mass, we beat our breast and ask forgiveness for our sins. And hopefully because we want to change. And so suffering does have many ways of being responded to. I used to think all old people are really lovely and patient. And then I realized, well, if they weren't lovely and patient when they were younger, there's not a great deal of chance of them being lovely and gentle as they grow old and get arthritis. But when we do experience suffering, we can become more of what we were. We can suddenly become angry and regretful at what we've had to lose and not sure of what we're going to take on. Or we can find acceptance. And the church does ask us to be open to change. Changing our clothes or changing our hairstyle, that's really very easy. But changing our mind, seeing something from a different perspective, is always a challenge. Let me read you what Jeff Wood, a Christian teacher, says. It's unhealthy to remain within a corridor of habitual consciousness, oblivious of God's wider world. I'll read it again. It's unhealthy to remain within a corridor of habitual consciousness, oblivious of God's wider world. So often what we do is make our mind up and we stick to it doggedly, without reaching out further to try to understand, to enter the world of another person, to understand where that person's coming from, to understand their history. And yet, Jesus is always inviting us into a new consciousness. That's what he was doing with Peter. Not pretending he didn't hear him, but wanting to awaken him to how important it is that we are open to change. New consciousness gives rise to the fact that we might not have had it right. And so, not only as a church, but as a nation and as a nation, we are asked to rethink and look at in a different way attitudes, particularly to racism, particularly to war and addiction and sexuality, and daring under the grace of God to think differently. And there's the rub. That's the difficulty. To really think and act differently. Being open to people and groups we might not normally associate with. Listening to television channels we might not choose to listen to, or papers, or anything on the internet that might be out of what our normal range, but daring to see things from a different perspective. Because in that way, we do grow. And I hope in doing so, that we can learn to feel the pain of others without sitting in judgment, instead of pretending that pain does not exist. Can we have the courage to say that our view of the world, racism and poverty, sexuality, might have been wrong? And in doing so, do penance and acknowledge the suffering of others and work to ease that pain and injustice. And in doing so, become part of the solution. Please like, subscribe, or comment below.